Welcome to my channel Limelight Leaks. Please share and subscribe and hit the bell icon for new updates. Loyalty or friendship? Believe you are aware, the American Pickers plot? Consider they it again. An ominous enigma threatens Pickers. Americans. Gone is Frank Fritz. The reality of his demise, however, is more dreadful beyond your wildest dreams. Now Danielle Colby left a courtroom shocking revelation. Now Mike Wolf must contend with a depressing experience. Another piece of information is lacking. A final phase-low voice, confidential records, significant quantities of funds transferred into Mike Wolf's bank account, Frank Fritz's toxic substance's physical form. Do you think it's all a coincidence? Discover the most sinister hidden information. Would you risk discovering find out? Offer your thoughts. I will inform us if I dare. Hit now is the time to join us in solving this puzzling case. On the oppressive Iowa courtroom, illumination from a cascade of lofty windows descended upon the polishing the wood, pouring contemplations on the anxious features of those currently available. Speculation from the audience dwindled, remaining quiet while Danielle Colby, the lady who was fundamental to American Pickers in the past, ascending to the stand of the witness. From her, an all-black ensemble failed to conceal with a quiver in her stride. Her incisive aunt shone with a fire of love for discovery-seeking, which now encompassed suffering Andresolve. Taking a firm hold of the microphone, she laboring to breathe, as if she were faced the tempest within. Seated beneath her, an old acquaintance of hers, Mike Wolf, and business associate, who is currently the accused. Wholly even so, his eyes, which flit with unease, which undermined his composed demeanor. It was almost time for Danielle to break the barrier of quiet that had confined her for an extended period of time, and the impending disclose may topple a whole kingdom founded upon quests for hidden objects. Then Danielle did breathe deeply. A trembling voice escaped her, but powerful. My silence has been excessive for lengthy, she started, pulling words from a broken spirit. In an effort to safeguard American Pickers, in order to preserve the reputation, beloved by countless admirers. However, I am not able to bear this load any longer. I am present to tell Frank Fritz the truth and for a respectable citizen. A palpable tension filled the air. With a firm grasp on the edge, Mike dipped his head, area of the table, as though attempting to enclose a chaos of feelings. But Danielle kept going. She discussed Frank's last days, her erstwhile confidant loved ones. She stated, Frank was scared, as her voice quivers. His phone rang at midnight, just 3 days prior to his demise. A feeble yet clear voice escaped him. His words were, if something were to happen to me, Danielle, check out Mike, the witness testified. Explosive device that burned slowly under the surface. The audience went wild in low speech. The press rushed to capture notes, and the jury members exchanged shocked looks. Mike quickly raised his head, fixed on Danielle with frigid stares, but she was unfazed. Her voice became more steady. What do you mean? I inquired of him. Why would you agree with that? Then Frank said, something is on Mike's mind. Afraid is he? I'll show you everything. I'd never seen how Frank freaked out. It wasn't like type paranoid. But on this occasion he was in fact afraid. Danielle hesitated, her voice quivering, gripped tightly, as if grasping up a raging river of unpleasant recollections. Then after receiving a message from Mike upon Frank's demise, it indicated solely going to meet Frank tonight. I really doubted a significant amount of it. However, once Frank departed at last, I realized I couldn't keep quiet any longer, for more time. The burdensome demands placed on having fond recollections of Danielle isn't all she is to Frank. During that time, she had persisted in high ground, conflicted in her allegiance to the program and her fixation on truth. Angry messages sent by Mike's chilling, terrifying cautions from the annals of all of the channels, and legally enforceable contracts sought to block her speech. I was asked to stay silent, Danielle replied angrily. They warned me that if I raised my voice, the complete production, all of our creations would fall apart. Unfortunately, the guilt. When Frank needed me, he gave me a call, a majority. Who will speak up if I remain silent? What Danielle concealed extended far beyond one last word from Frank. She divulged the being present with a dark-colored notebook, something always by his side, where he recorded each and every aspect of his disputes, from unequal distributions of profits, dominaces operating in the shadows. In that, my notebook disappeared, Danielle exclaimed, her whispered with an air of distrust. Prior to Frank's demise, it was present. But upon the arrival of law enforcement, it had faded away. She fixed her gaze squarely on the scrutinizing the EI jury, carving out one the total stillness. Yes, I am aware that Notepad contains the clues to every aspect of Mike regarding Frank's situation and the hidden truths that American pickers throughout the years. With her dying remarks, she left a poignant impression on the atmosphere as if to proclaim war. Dear Mike Wolves, formerly emblematic of ardor and companionship, which had previously occupied the violent downpour. Was he really treacherous to his closest friend? Oh, the mysteries concealed within Frank's secret notebook has the power to rattle a television series that viewers adore. As Danielle descended from her perch as the witness, she stood there staring at Mike, not with a deep sense of melancholy and fury. The truth was now within reach because of her. However, the cost could lead to the demise of all that she had previously treasured. On the frigid, sterilized mortuary chamber in Davenport, Iowa, where chemical aromas blended under the stifling stillness, fluorescent steel table was illuminated by the lights, where the lifeless form of Frank Fritz rested, a mysterious riddle awaiting resolution. The month of October 2024, word of his passing spread rapidly, with press releases jumped to the conclusion that deceased American picker star suffered from a heart attack. Those who were closest to Frank, however, while Danielle Colby was a kid, he was acquaintance, sensed that something was amiss. They grasped the complexity of the truth. Hello? Frank, who had valiantly fought and overcome in 2022, had accomplished an impressive getting back on foot. A few short weeks prior to his passing, in the middle of a video, he smiled at Danielle. Bring up the topic, boasting. I strolled around this morning, Danielle. My plan is to surpass Mike Wolf in age. Eventually, you will see. Had taken his life on such an abrupt, such cruelty? No way. An autopsy report was made public with a, did the stroke idea crumble a month later? No evidence of obstructed arteries was found. No bleeding in the brain. No sudden injury often observed in situations like these. Alternatively, while the team of detectives discovered, horrifying, remains of thallium sulfate, an uncommon and extremely lethal toxin within Frank's circulatory system. Assassination plotted during the Cold War. Thallium is a tasteless and odorless tool, not always easy to see. However, it destroys the body in a methodical, ruthless fashion. The kidneys and liver of Frank displayed acute injury unconnected to his Crohn's condition that is associated with health condition. Endocrinologists validated the until a few hours before he was poisoned, just before he passed away, maybe due to his diet when breathed in. The unsettling inquiry stood over it. When it came to Frank's last moments, and what caused such a fatal substance first published. At Frank's, the police showed up, Iowa house, where he was discovered sprawled out lying on his side in bed, with his palm resting on pretending to make a phone call. An individual. No indications of coercion were found. Entrance. No looted possessions. None unusual pharmaceuticals, and zero indications of a struggle. All access to the house was restricted. Interior. So remarkably clean that it seemed to have had a thorough cleaning prior to the officials showed up. The frightening flawlessness merely served to heighten the enigma. Was the murderer in possession of Frank's in the road? Or what's worse, if it were someone named Frank relied on? As they continued to probe, darkened the revelations even further. An peculiar enzyme discovered in the bile of Frank, implying that he has encountered a complex chemical substance, not only the element talc. Because of this, the horrifying, perhaps the murderer made use of a complex lethal mixture developed so as to evade detection. However, a great deal concerning piece of information was still lacking. Little black notebook, the one wherein Frank recorded his disagreements in great detail with Mike Wolf as he plots to expose about American pickers, is the reality. The journal that he had stashed away in the drawer of his office was nowhere to be found. On Frank's laptop, detectives found a brief audio recording. Innes spoke with a quiver in his voice. Mike took every cent. Find me if I vanish. The last murmur of Frank, like a dagger-like blade, aimed squarely at the companion he'd known for more than several decades. There was purpose behind his demise. It marked the start of an ominous mystery involving unspoken strands that plunged directly into the electrical core of a T-vampire. With the light from Thea's, Danielle Colby stood before the judge in the individual, testifying, her speech like that of a river, while at times serene, pulsating with emotion as she related the tale of a connection that was formerly fundamental to U.S. salvage workers. At this point, though, it mattered not at all, upon which the ashes of treachery lay and loneliness. Eyes narrowed as she faced the judges, heiries that glowed with anguish. Mike and I, Frank and Frank, were like brothers, she started. She spoke, with a sorrowful tone. However, in the background glitz and glamour on TV, fractures began to emerge, driven not by envy but by driven by desire and control. The truth behind the situations, disputes, and hidden information that astonished the jury. Before his time, Mike Wolf, the unbreakable bond with Frank Fritz, who had gradually transformed into a manipulator, driving Frank towards the cast's shadow. She recounted the anxious days when Mike started making all of the decisions himself of US-based collectors of goods. For Mike, perfection was paramount. "I hate you," she remarked with some hostility. He had a say in the filming sites, determined which products broadcast, even our own words. Hello, Frank no longer had the freedom to express himself. Conflicts around. Finances intensified when Frank realized that his cut of the profits was taking a bite out of. While listening to a tape before the judge, Danielle laid out. Frank's quavering voice echoed. "I was able to assist launch this program, but Mike stole it. I'm only receiving half of what he promised. Showcases on television." The way he spoke was like a knife, revealing the wrongdoing he suffered. While the defendant sat at his table, Mike dipped his head low, but a glimmer in his eye while feeling resentful, as if unable to rein in his wrath. Fran's isolation, as per Danielle's assertion, was the most upsetting portion. Upon ascending from the performance in 2020, he got sick with a cold. Void. Frank came to my aid. The intensity in his voice, with tears in her eyes. She spoke. "It was told me that not even Mike has phoned me. At most once after my back operation. 20 years of relationship, and he dismissed me with contempt as a used object, feeling pushed and betrayed, based on the very idea they had created, in unison." Paused, Danielle took a deep breath. Fighting wasn't the only thing Frank was doing. Illness. As he struggled with the agony of having one's closest companion leave them in the story of his life, her remarks rang true as a bell. Toll, igniting an agonizing reality. Dear Mike opted for self-interest rather than fraternity, causing Frank to feel alone and devastated by deep, unhealing wounds. However, the most startling discovery was accompanied by a contacted Frank Fritz via phone in the early hours of the morning. A faint voice escaped him, paralyzed with terror. "Danielle," he finally said, silently uttered, every word a desperate attempt. "What if, behold Mike, no matter what befalls me?" Danielle was dismayed by the statement's icy tone, in a frozen state. Her attempt to persuade him was corresponded, but Frank merely restated, his voice shaking. "Someone is watching me. I am aware an excessive amount." Near the end of his life, Frank spent a life consumed by paranoia, intent on, while he checks the locks. Twice like an ethereal figure was following he had. Danielle stood before the judge recalling the incident. She spoke cracking. Frank had never looked that scared. Apparently Mike was scared about unknowns might devastate each and everyone. An air of foreboding lingered in the judgment hall air as a scourge. Wolf Mike, attentively taking notes, tightly gripped his clenched fists, his terrified eyes wide-eyed. For what reason was Frank so terrified of this secret? All of his life. What depravities, moreover, unearthed as the reality emerged? Under Leipers's utterly dark sky, in Mike Wolf's extravagant, the estate was encircled by flashing FBI agents' lights. Raid on December 8, 2024, had remained secret. Nobody from the press not permitted in the area immediately surrounding the incident. Nevertheless, which organizations contained within rattled the whole probe into the demise of Frank Fritz. Tethered behind a secured medicine cabinet, at Mike's personal restroom were situated above a piles of chemical containers, one of which is a little vial of thallium sulfate, one of identical toxin that had murdered Frank. A poisonous, odorless material, it was irrefutable evidence of a plotted affair. However, the investigation did not end there. They followed the trail of money, discovered a transaction that raised red flags. On September 26th, Wolf had wired $65,000, goods sent to a chemical distributor in the Windy City. Invoice and notes absent, merely them Wolf's identity and a tracked IP address shifting gears to Mike's private iPad. The supplier verified that the order was comprised thallium sulfate, a drug that has the potential to leak enter the body covertly, imitating widespread disease. It just so happened that exact to disregard. If Mike had been preparing for this for weeks, stealthily in order to render Frank speechless indefinitely, the already terrifying inquiry took on an even more torment as soon as detectives discovered the duration of Frank's deterioration, the undiagnosed exhaustion, his assertion that he grew weaker with each sight of Mike, in full harmony with the recognized consequences of toxicity from thallium. However, a great deal shocking revelation was concealed within Mike's safe. Multiple documents pertaining to the transfer legally owning the American Picker name, having been signed by Frank Fritz less than a week following his descent into a passed out. Expert forensic examination verified the signature was created by forgery, sophisticated program software. A crucial witness, a former treasurer of Antique, testified with apprehension regarding archaeology, hands that she felt coerced into by Mike to finish the documentation right away following funeral for Frank, as if he were rushing in order to completely get rid of his old companion. Recovered emails from the FBI system portrayed Mike in an even more negative light-hatching plan. One message was sent to his lawyer. He penned the following: "We must address the Frank problem before it gets out of hand, command." The words were icy, cold, and deliberate, as if prepared to risk everything to safeguard his empire of television. At TU. The courtroom's premise as the state presented these damning bits of proof, Mike remained immobile, despite the fact that his icy fists disclosed the inner tempest. For each linking the thallium vial to with the fake signature, described the depiction of a guy whose life is controlled, prepared to turn his back on his best friend in arms. Does Mike really have all the answers, reasons for Frank's demise? Or perhaps, just another character playing a far more sinister role? The reality, slowly, as if it were a long-lost artifact, appearing at an excruciating expense. During a February 2025 in an Iowa courthouse, the anxiety was heavy in the air. Bright light flowed in via the lofty windows, casting light on the jury's chamber, where Severe attentively took in every word. From a vague suspicion had present day transformed into distinct indictment against Mike Wolfe, the former respected symbol of American pickers. It was suspected of having a hand in Frank death of Fritz and financial deceit, with proof that is precise enough to split his empire, which he meticulously built. All eyes in the jam-packed gallery focused on Mike, who stayed motionless and even, when his fingers became a little pale under his clenched fists, headable for defense. Colby, Danielle, defendant's star witness, climbed onto. They maintain their composure. She has a distinct voice, inconsolable, yet still slashed like a sharp tool. Frank wasn't merely an associate. She looked at him with concern and replied, "He was family," directed at Mike, a combination of sadness and her eyes betraying her. She described the days that Frank spent dying in terror, ongoing reference to Mike as a potential danger. "Mike is afraid he informed me, reveal the reality of the program. I put out an effort, with the purpose of assuaging his fears, but now I see how I was incorrect," Danielle said. Afterwards presented a clip of Frank's own computer, his voice weak, yet unwavering. "Whatever happens, Mike decides. If I vanish, he's the mastermind." An icy wind blew through the chamber, as if a curse were resonating from in the afterlife. After that, Travis came next. Reynolds, who works as a shade technician on American Pickers, who provided an alternative viewpoint regarding Mike's fixation on control, maintaining a steady, composed tone. According to Travis's testimony, Mike didn't take into consideration Frank's well-being, opted out. "I recall a period when Frank almost collapsed, but Mike coerced him nevertheless, to film an exchange of proposals. His words were, 'I will film it if Frank is unable to do it.' That wasn't a friendship, it was me. That constituted brutality." He waited, his gaze fixed, reviewing the panel of judges. All that mattered to Mike was the show, the fame, and the fortune. To him, Frank was merely in the way. Based on Travis's testimony, a disturbing depiction of Mike Wolfe obsessed with achieving one's goals, prepared to set aside his best friend in order to maintain his complete dominion. However, the most shocking, at the precise moment when Mike Wolfe out of nowhere stood up, shattering the stillness, on the bench of the accused. "No more." Then howled, his voice quivering with fury, a state of panic. "Frank was not murdered by me. Because he was my brother." Mike's gaze was filled with red in the face, as if it were about to burst, might potentially detonate. "He was pushed too hard by me. It was my hope that the show would be a hit. I wished it could encompass more than just us." He then pointed out, "But I never wanted him dead," looked at Danielle while his voice quivered. "It is you am perplexed by the amount of pressure I was in the basement. I had to tend to Frank since he was weakening. Take the spotlight." Neither could allow everything to crumble. The courtroom setting froze in shock and utter quiet, with every glance focusing on Mike. Lucille, motionless on the stand, gazed at him with a combination of feeling shocked and sad. Had Mike lost it? An instant of genuine regret, or the last desperation-ridden man's attempt to influence who would sit on the jury? The prosecution failed to omit any more rapidly. He then proceeded to present scathing new evidence. A message that Mike's removed device to his legal counsel that stated, if he must make arrangements for Frank's return, assuredly, all of it is mine. Another communication sent 3 days prior to Frank's, the thought of dying, was terrifying. He does, declining. What if anything were to happen, at a rapid pace? All of the lines like a razor, Mike defends himself. In his lawyer Raymond Heller made an effort to promote in the back, claiming that these were misconceptions, with Mike being seen as subjected to a campaign of defamation, but the cautious looked at each other. The jury members implied they were veering towards a more sinister reality. Mike slouched when the court adjourned, sunk into his chair, slumped over in despair, due to the evidence presented. Danielle descended from her perch as the witnessed her sobs dripping down her face, though her gait never wavered. That the reality, despite its agonizing nature, was first signs of appearing, and absolutely nobody. That's something even Mike Wolfe could avoid. All the time. The focus of this trial extended beyond Amon. It dealt with the cost of stardom, in which a friendship is given up for the pedestal that holds ambition. With the closing of the courtroom doors, even the muted illumination cast by the lofty windows failed to dispel the shadows surrounding the trial of Mike Wolfe. United States base pickers, who were once a shining example of curiosity, camaraderie, and love, were depleted to a cinder due to insatiable desire and treachery. This instance revealed beneath the surface of the show. With a grin, concealed Mike's subtle manipulation behind the screen, when the assurances of camaraderie were crushed by the burden of achievement. Thieves that bind Frank Fritz and Mike together. Danielle Colby, who was once the heart and soul of display, which had broken and left a scar among their legions of devoted followers. Now, without regard to the outcome, Mike Wolfe tarnished their name forever. The someone who was previously adored for his energy was at this point seen with distrust, considering the possibility of giving up a topoly to safeguard his dominion. United States base pickers, formerly a sign of wealth exploring and forming a deep bond, having become an admonition regarding the cost of power and unbridled desire. Once captivated by the program's credibility, were put to the test, coming to terms with it might have all been a well-orchestrated performance. The show's lasting impact had been once brilliant, was now cast in a deeper reality. Companionship is a commodity, because the glare of television might obscure dreadful mysteries, when filming begins, after which a haunting remains empty space and an unanswered inquiry. Was fame's eternal value how much? When the smoke clears from the defendant's side of the aisle, the narrative is now not an excursion through buried riches, however a contemporary tragic tale of avarice and treachery. It was Mike. A red flag has been raised by the Wolfe case, showing how stardom can transform even the strongest ties to cinders. The bond between amid Danielle's interactions with Mike Frank Fritz Colby, who was once a beacon of hope for millions, was burned by the weight of achievement as well as unbridled desire. This narrative is an stern warning. If the cost of fame is compensated with honesty and devotion, is always too high. American pickers were formerly revered the worth of things that are discarded. However, the long-lost principles of the show were sincerity and camaraderie, dispersed throughout powerful and wealthy whirlwind. No matter if, whether or not Mike is free, he will always to live in constant fear of what he could do lost. This is more than simply a TV show's backstory. Show. Everyone can learn from this. Fame can elevate you, but it may equally ruin all that matters to you. In what ways can one? Do you have any thoughts about this unfortunate event? Did Mike happen to be the treacherous, or succumbing to external forces? What about us? Fill us in on the details.